Quincy thought he was a king. Now he is begging for scraps in a cold cell. I am not his wife anymore. I am his judge. Look at him. Yesterday he owned the skyline. Today he owns nothing. On our 3rd anniversary, he didn't give me diamonds. He snapped my leg like a dry twig. He tossed me into a dark basement to rot. All while my best friend laughed in my bed. He thought I was a weak girl. He thought my father was a nobody. He forgot the golden rule. You never wound a wolf and let it live. Quincy didn't know I built every brick of his empire from the shadows. And he certainly didn't know that my janitor father actually owns the ground he walks on. This is not a story about survival. This is a masterclass in how to dismantle a monster. Sit down, listen closely. Because tonight, the sterling bloodline ends. The cold Italian marble was the first thing I felt. It was not the warmth of a welcome home. It was a freezing, unforgiving slab of white stone against my cheek. I could smell the metallic temps of my own blood. It mixed with the scent of Santel 33. That was the perfume I bought for Siani on her birthday. Now it was the scent of my execution. I gave Quincy 3 years of my brilliance. I built his blueprints. I polished his reputation. I turned a boy with a dream into the king of Tribeca. And in return, he gave me a broken tibia and a dusty basement floor. He stood above me. His shadow was long and jagged under the designer chandelier. He was laughing. It was a dry, hollow sound. A sound that did not belong to the man I married. Siani was there too. Wrapped in my silk sheets, she looked down at me with a pity that felt like acid. They forgot one vital thing. I am a Vance. My family does not bleed like normal people. We never bleed alone. The day started with a lie. It was our 3rd wedding anniversary. The rain was drumming against the windows of the hotel in Midtown. A steady, rhythmic beat, like a warning I chose to ignore. I had finished my New York Fashion Week show 48 hours early. My collection was the talk of the town. The critics called it a masterpiece of shadow and light. I was the light. I thought Quincy was my anchor. I wanted to surprise him. I bought a vintage watch, a piece of history that cost more than most people earn in a decade. I imagined his face, the soft smile, the way he would pull me into his arms and tell me he was proud. I was a fool, a brilliant, successful, blind fool. When I reached the penthouse, the silence was the first red flag. The air felt thick, heavy with a secret. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The click of my stilettos was sharp. It echoed off the walls like a countdown usually. The house smelled like fresh lilies and expensive coffee. But today, it smelled like sweat and cheap wine. I saw her lace underwear on the stairs, a trail of betrayal leading straight to my sanctuary. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a frantic, wild bird trying to escape a cage. I felt a cold sweat break across my neck. My palms were clammy. I held on to a shred of hope. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the maid was messy. But the logic I used to build an empire told me otherwise. I reached the master bedroom. The door was ajar. I heard the moans. They were ragged, hungry. They were sounds I thought were reserved only for us. Then I heard her voice, Siani, my best friend from Howard University, the girl I fed when she was broke, the girl I hired when no one else would. She asked him if I would come back early. Quincy's voice was like a knife in my gut. He called me a starving designer. He said I lived off his dime. I stood there, trembling. The rage was starting to burn. It was a low, blue flame in the center of my soul. I realized then, every success he had, every contract he signed, it was because of my mind, my connections, my father's silent influence. And he thought I was the parasite. I did not knock. I kicked the door. The sound was like a gunshot. They scrambled. The sheets were a mess of white silk and lies. Siani screamed, but she did not look ashamed. She had a smirk, a nasty, defiant look in her eyes. Quincy looked at me like I was a ghost, an inconvenience. I did not cry. I did not beg. I walked straight to Siani and I swung. My hand connected with her cheek with the force of 3 years of wasted love. Her head snapped back. A thin line of blood leaked from her mouth. It was the most satisfying thing I had ever felt. Then the world turned upside down. Quincy did not defend me. He did not apologize. He jumped out of the bed and he hit me. A hard professional punch to the stomach. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. I fell to my knees. The pain was immediate, blinding. He grabbed me by my hair. He dragged me toward the grand staircase. He called me a girl who draws clothes. He said marrying into his family was a win for my people. I started to laugh. It was a bloody, dark laugh. I told him he forgot who he was before me. A kid from the block with nothing but a dream and a suit I bought him in a fit of pure, unfiltered rage. He shoved me. I did not just fall. I flew. My body hit the decorative pedestal at the landing. The crack was loud. It was a sickening, wet sound. My right leg snapped. The pain was white hot. It was a lightning bolt that stayed in my marrow. I shrieked. A sound of pure agony that should have moved a heart of stone. But Quincy just walked down the stairs. He looked at my mangled leg and he kicked it. I felt my vision go black at the edges. Siani came down, wrapped in my sheet. She looked pale, but she did not stop him. She called me a nuisance. He dragged me again, my broken leg trailing behind me like a piece of dead weight. Every inch was a new level of hell. He opened the basement door. The smell of damp earth and old boxes rushed up. He tossed me inside, into the dark. He told the staff to ignore me. No water, no food. He wanted me to reflect. He wanted me to remember my place. The steel door slammed. The click of the lock was final. I lay there, curled in a ball. The darkness was absolute. My leg was swelling. I could feel the heat radiating from the broken bone. I was alone, or so he thought. I reached into my pocket. My fingers were shaking, but my phone was there. It was a miracle, a tiny glow of light in a tomb of shadows. I scrolled to the bottom of my contacts, to a number I had buried 20 years ago. The name was just one word: Pop. I had spent my whole life trying to be normal. I wanted to be Kamari the designer, not Kamari, the daughter of the syndicate. I wanted to earn my way without the shadow of my father's power. But nobility does not matter when you are bleeding in a basement. I hit call. The phone rang 3 times. Then that voice, deep, like a rolling storm. "Who is this?" he asked. I whispered his name. I told him my husband broke me. I told him where I was. There was a silence on the other end. A silence so heavy it felt like it could crush the earth. Then I heard a chair crash. I heard the sound of a man becoming a monster. 10 minutes, he said. The line went dead. I lay my head back on the cold floor. I began to laugh again. I laughed until tears carved lines through the dust on my face. Quincy thought he married a designer. He thought he was playing with a kitten. He has no idea. He just invited the devil into his living room. And the devil is coming to take back what belongs to him. The air in the penthouse was dead. It did not carry the scent of home. It carried the smell of a rotting secret. I stood in the foyer. My designer bags felt like lead in my hands. The shadows were long. They stretched across the white Italian marble-like dark. Searching fingers. I could hear the rain. It was a dull, persistent roar against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan was a blur of gray and neon outside. But inside, the silence was louder than the storm. I felt a chill. It was not from the air conditioning. It was a premonition. My lungs felt tight. Every breath was a heavy struggle. I looked at the floor. There was a single gold earring. It was not mine. It was a jagged piece of metal that tore through my heart before I even reached the stairs. I walked deeper into the living room. My footsteps were silent on the silk rugs, but the world felt like it was screaming. I saw a bottle of expensive champagne on the coffee table. 2 glasses were empty. One had a smudge of red lipstick on the rim. a shade called Rebel Red, Siani's signature. The scent of her perfume hung in the air like a poisonous fog. It was thick, sweet, cloaking the room in a layer of betrayal. My stomach twisted. I remembered the nights I sat in this very spot, sketching designs until the sun came up. I've built this place. I chose the fabric for the sofas. I picked the art on the walls. I thought I was building a life with Quincy. I thought we were a team. But the penthouse felt cold now. It was a hollow shell, a museum of my own stupidity. I looked at the staircase. The shadows up there seemed to move. They felt heavy, oppressive. I started to climb. Every step felt like an eternity. My hand gripped the cold steel railing. My knuckles were white. The house was humming with a vibration I had never felt before. It was the sound of a lie being lived. I reached the second floor. The door to our master bedroom was not just open. It was a gaping wound. I stood in the hallway, paralyzed. The light from the hallway spilled into the darkened room. It hit the floor. I saw my mother's jewelry box. It was open. The velvet lining was empty. The items I cherished most were gone. I stepped into the room. The air was warm. Too warm. It smelled like sweat and expensive lies. I did not see Quincy first. I saw the shadow on the wall. It was a woman's profile. Arrogant, elegant, poisonous. I turned my head slowly. Siani was sitting on the edge of my bed. She was not scurrying for a towel. She was not hiding her face in shame. She was looking in my vanity mirror. She was holding my mother's black pearl necklace. The pearls were rare. They were a gift from my father to my mother before I was born. They were supposed to be my legacy. Now they were in her hands. She was clasping them around her neck. It's cold. Dark pearls looked like oil against her skin. They did not belong there. She caught my eye in the reflection of the mirror. She did not flinch. A slow, nasty smirk spread across her face. It was the look of a predator who had already won. She raised her hand. My wedding ring was on her finger. It was too loose. It hung off her knuckle, but she wore it like a crown. She twisted the diamond. The light from the bedside lamp hit the stone. It sent a flash of light across the room. It felt like a physical strike to my eyes. "You're early." "Kamari," she said. Her voice was like acid. It was sickeningly sweet, dripping with a confidence that made my skin crawl. She stood up. She was wearing my silk robe, the one I bought in Paris. She walked toward me with a rhythmic, swaying grace. She touched the black pearls on her neck. Her fingers were long, calculating. "These pearls really do suit me better, don't you think?" she whispered. She was inches from my face now. I could see the triumph in her eyes. It was a deep, dark satisfaction. She was not just stealing my husband. She was trying to steal my soul. She was trying to erase me from my own home. Behind her, Quincy shifted in the bed. He looked like a coward. His eyes were wide. Panic was written all over his face. But Siani did not care about his fear. She was focused on my pain. She wanted to drink it. She wanted to savor the moment I realized that my life was a lie. I looked at her. I looked at the ring. I looked at the pearls. The betrayal was a physical weight in the room. It was thick enough to touch. I could hear the hum of the city outside, the distant sirens, the life that was continuing without me. But in this room, time had stopped. My heart was a stone in my chest. I felt a surge of adrenaline. It was cold, sharp. It was the only thing keeping me upright. I looked past her at Quincy. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. He was a small man in a large room. He was a boy playing in a world he did not understand. Siani laughed. It was a soft, jagged sound. She touched my cheek with her hand, the hand wearing my wedding ring. "Don't look so shocked, Kamari. You were always too busy with your sketches. Too busy building your little empire. You forgot to take care of what was yours." Her words were a calculated attack. She knew where to hit. She knew my insecurities. She was my best friend. She knew the map of my heart, and she had used it to destroy me. The silence stretched. It was a bridge over a dark abyss. I could feel the rage building. It was not a wild, out of control fire. It was a cold, blue flame. It was the kind of rage that built empires. The kind of rage my father used to control the city. I realized then that I had been playing a game with no rules. I had been honorable. I had been kind. I had been a wife and a friend. And it had brought me here, to a room filled with shadows and thieves. Siani leaned in closer. Her breath smelled like the champagne she had stolen from my fridge. You have nothing left, Kamari. The business. The house. The husband. It's all mine now. You're just a girl with a broken heart and a pile of sketches. She was mocking me. She was daring me to react. She thought I was weak. She thought the designer was all I was. She forgot who my father was. She forgot the blood that ran through my veins. I looked at her one last time. My voice was a raspy whisper. The pearls, Siani, take them off. She laughed again, a loud, derisive sound. She gripped the necklace tighter. Make me. The challenge was set. The room felt like it was about to explode. I could feel the shift in the air. The shadow in the penthouse was no longer a secret. It was a declaration of war. And as the rain hammered against the glass, I knew. I would not be the one who lost everything. She turned back to the mirror, completely dismissing me. She was admiring the black pearls again. She was posing, preening. She thought she was the new queen of the penthouse. But she was just a squatter in a temple she didn't build. I looked at Quincy. He was finally getting out of bed. His movements were clumsy, fearful. He looked like a man who had just realized he had walked into a trap. But it wasn't my trap. Not yet. I stepped back. The darkness of the hallway felt safer than the light of that room. I could feel the cold marble under my feet through my stockings. I felt a strange sense of clarity. The pain was still there, but it was being pushed aside by a singular, lethal purpose. I would let them have their moment. I would let them think they had broken me, because the higher they climbed, the further they would have to fall. I looked at the black pearls one last time. They shimmered in the dim light. They were a promise of the vengeance to come. My mother always told me that true power is silent. It is the shadow that moves when everyone is looking at the light. Siani was the light, arrogant, loud, obvious. I was the shadow, and the shadow was about to swallow the penthouse whole. The dark was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of my wasted years. My leg was screaming, jagged. White heat that made my skin crawl and my breath hitch. I was lying on a pile of old, dusty canvases in the corner of the cellar. The smell of oil paint and turpentine was faint. It was a ghost of the girl I used to be. The girl who believed that talent was enough to build a life. The girl who thought love was a shield against the world. The concrete floor was a freezing, unforgiving weight against my spine. I could hear a pipe dripping in the far corner. A slow, steady, ticking sound. It was the sound of my life leaking away, one drop at a time. I gripped my phone. The screen was the only star in this hell. I had always been the architect. I was the one who stayed up until 4 a.m. I was the one who negotiated the textiles in Milan. I was the one who convinced the board that we needed to expand. Quincy was just the face, the handsome, charismatic mask I put on my empire. I thought he was protecting me. I thought he handled the boring part so I could create. But as I lay there, the pain in my leg clearing the fog from my mind, I started to look. Really? Look. I logged into our joint corporate vault. My fingers were slippery with cold sweat. I had to bypass 3 layers of security that I had built myself. Quincy never thought I would check. He thought I was too ethereal, too focused on silk and lace to care about ledgers and wire transfers. He was wrong. The first document I opened felt like a physical blow. It was worse than the kick he gave my ribs. It was a transfer of $2 million. The destination was an offshore account titled SF Holdings. Siani Fairchild. It was not just a fling. It was a partnership. They were not just sleeping in my bed. They were eating my future. They were harvesting the fruits of my labor while I was busy dreaming of a family. The numbers on the screen were a sea of red, like the blood on my face. I scrolled further. The embezzlement was systematic. It was cold. It was a slow, calculated murder of Lathan Designs. He had mortgaged the Tribeca warehouse, the place where my mother's original sewing machines were kept. He had sold the intellectual property rights to my obsidian collection to a shell company in the Bahamas. Everything I had built to honor my mother. Everything I had worked for since I was 16. It was being dismantled, piece by piece. I felt a new kind of cold. It was a freezing fire in my veins. The emotional betrayal was a wound, but the financial betrayal was an insult. He did not just cheat. He tried to leave me a beggar. He wanted to break my legs so I could not walk. And he wanted to take my money so I could not run. He wanted to make sure that when he finally tossed me out, I would have nothing. No name, no home, no legacy. The basement was damp. The air tasted like mildew and forgotten things. I could feel the dust settling on my skin. It felt like a shroud. I looked at a crate nearby. It was labeled wedding memorabilia. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear it apart. But I could not move. The smallest shift of my hips sent a wave of agony through my leg. I had to remain still. I had to be a statue in my own tomb. I looked back at the phone. I opened the payroll records. He had been paying Siani a consultant fee of $20,000 a month. For what? For the advice she gave him while they were destroying my peace. I saw the receipts for jewelry, a Cartier bracelet, a diamond necklace, things I never saw, things he bought with the profits from my hard work. The silence of the penthouse above was terrifying. I knew they were up there, in my kitchen, drinking the vintage wine I bought for our anniversary. Maybe they were laughing about how easy it was, how Kamari the dreamer was finally out of the way. They probably thought I was crying. They probably thought I was begging God for mercy. But I was doing something much more dangerous. I was auditing. I was counting every cent, every forged signature, every lie. I was turning my pain into a ledger, and the debt was growing by the second. I remembered the day we started the company. We were in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. The heater did not work. We shared a single desk. I told him that one day we would be the biggest name in New York. He held my hand and told me he would give his life to protect my vision. What a beautiful lie. He did not want to protect my vision. He wanted to own it. He waited until the seeds I planted grew into a forest, and then he tried to burn me alive in the center of it. I looked at the dripping pipe again. Drop, drop. It was hypnotic. It was the only clock I had. My leg was starting to throb with a pulse of its own. It felt like it was made of molten lead. I could feel the fever starting to rise, a low, simmering heat in my blood. I needed to stay conscious. I needed to finish the download. I sent the files to a secure, encrypted server, a place Quincy could never find. I sent a copy to my father's private secure line. I knew Malik would see it before they even reached the house. I thought about Siani, my best friend. We were sisters at Howard. I shared my dreams with her. I told her the secrets of my father's past. I told her how much I wanted to be free of the violence. She used that against me. She knew I would never call my father unless I was desperate. She thought she could push me, break me, and I would just disappear into the shadows. She forgot that shadows can also strike back. She forgot that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has nothing left to lose. The darkness of the basement began to feel like an ally. It hid my tears. It hid my brokenness. It allowed me to focus. I realized that my marriage was not a partnership. It was a heist. Quincy Sterling did not fall in love with me. He fell in love with my potential. He saw a gold mine and he spent 3 years digging. He thought he had reached the bottom. He thought there was nothing left to take. He was so wrong. He had not even scratched the surface of what I am capable of when I am angry. I felt a vibration in the floor, a distant, heavy thud. It came from the street level, far above my concrete prison. It was the sound of a heavy door being kicked open. Not the elegant click of a key, but the violent intrusion of a power that does not ask for permission. My heart leaped. The 10 minutes were almost up. The silence of the penthouse was about to be shattered. The darkness of the basement was about to be met with the blinding light of a reckoning. I gripped my phone one last time. I looked at the red numbers on the screen. The 2 million. The 5 million. The stolen warehouse. I whispered a promise to the shadows. I will take it all back, Quincy. Every cent. Every brick. Every breath. I could hear heavy footsteps on the stairs now. These were not the footsteps of the house staff. These were the footsteps of men who knew how to walk through fire. Men who worked for the deacon. The basement door groaned. The hinges screamed in protest. The light from the hallway began to bleed into my tomb. It was a harsh, artificial yellow light. It hurt my eyes. But I did not turn away. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the end of my isolation. I did not move. I did not scream. I just waited. The financial betrayal was the final lesson. I learned that in this world, you do not just protect your heart. You protect your empire. I watched the door. The shadow that fell across the floor was massive. It was a shadow of protection. A shadow of absolute vengeance. The air in the basement shifted. The dampness was replaced by the faint, sharp smell of gunpowder and expensive cigars. The rescue was here. But the war had only just begun. Quincy thought he was rid of me. He thought the designer was broken. He is about to find out that Avance never stays down. And when we rise, we bring the storm with us. The darkness was no longer a cage. It was a war room. I was no longer a wife. I was Avance. The freezing marble against my cheek felt like an old friend now. It was grounding me. It was reminding me of what I had lost and what I was about to take back. I lay in the shadows of the cellar. The pain in my leg was a rhythmic pulse. It was no longer an agony. It was a fuel. Hello. Burning fire that cleared the fog from my mind. I looked at the glowing screen of my phone. The red numbers of Quincy's theft were burned into my retinas. He thought he could bury me. He thought the designer was too soft for the dirt. He was wrong. I am my father's daughter. The blood in my veins does not just carry life. It carries a legacy of iron and fire. I did not dial with a trembling hand. My fingers were steady. The screen illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. I looked at the contact that had remained untouched for years. The name Pop was a simple mask for a man who moved mountains. For a man who controlled the secret pulse of this city. I pressed the call button. The phone rang. 1. 2. The silence between the rings was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the cellar. I could hear my own heart, slow, deliberate, thumping like a war drum against the concrete. I could smell the damp earth of the basement. I could hear the steady drip of the pipe in the corner, ticking like a clock. Counting down the seconds of Quincy Sterling's life, he picked up. He did not say hello. He did not ask who it was. He knew. He always knew. The sound of his breathing was like the low rumble of a distant engine. It was power. It was protection. It was the sound of a man who lived in the shadows so I could live in the light. I did not cry. My voice was not a raspy whisper of a broken victim. It was the voice of a commander reporting a tactical failure. I spoke into the dark. My words were shards of ice. Dad, the investment failed. I paused. I let the weight of that statement hang in the air. I could almost feel him standing up in his office, high above the noise of Manhattan. In a room that smelled like cedar and expensive tobacco. It is time to liquidate the Sterling family. The word liquidate felt heavy. It felt final. To anyone else. It was a financial term. To us. It was an execution order. It meant the end of their name. The end of their credit. The end of their peace. It meant that every brick Quincy had laid, every contract he had signed, every lie he had told, was about to be audited by a power he could not comprehend. My father did not ask for details. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask why I was calling from a basement. He understood the subtext. He knew that if his daughter was calling after 3 years of silence, the world was already on fire. I lay my head back against the dusty canvases. I felt a surge of strength. The coldness in my chest was expanding. It was replacing the fear. It was replacing the love I once had for a man who never deserved my brilliance. Quincy thought he had married a simple girl who liked to draw clothes. He thought he could break my leg and lock me away like a discarded toy. He forgot that every success he had, every door that opened for him in this city, was because of the silent shadow of the deacon. He thought he was the king. He did not realize he was just a puppet whose strings had just been cut. The atmosphere in the basement shifted. The air felt charged, electric. I could almost hear the gears of my father's machine beginning to turn. Thousands of miles of fiber optic cables, hundreds of men in dark suits, dozens of bank accounts in Switzerland. They were all waking up. They were all focusing on a single target. Quincy Sterling, Siani Fairchild. Their betrayal was no longer a private affair. It was a global liability. I looked at the dripping pipe. Drop, drop, drop. The rhythm was no longer a nuisance. It was a countdown. I thought about my father, Elias Vance, to the world. He was a myth, a whisper, a man who cleaned up the messes of the elite. To me, he was the man who taught me that a Vance never begs. We negotiate, and if the negotiation fails, we terminate. I had tried to run from that life. I wanted the white picket fence, the fashion shows, the normal marriage. I thought I could build a world out of silk and lace. But Quincy showed me the truth. Silk can be used as a blindfold, and lace is easily torn. The only thing that lasts in this world is iron. And the deacon was the master of the forge. The silence on the phone was absolute. My father was a man of few words, but his silence was a symphony of destruction. I could picture him now, looking out over the city lights, signaling Moloch, his right hand. The man who moved like a ghost. I knew that within minutes. The Sterling's credit cards would stop working. Their private investigators would find themselves under investigation. Their secrets would be leaked to the highest bidders. The investment had failed, and the cost of that failure was everything they owned. I felt a strange sense of peace. The physical pain in my leg was still there, a dull, persistent ache. But my mind was clear. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of their collapse. I had the ledgers. I had the evidence of the embezzlement. I had the truth. And now, I had the power to deliver it. I looked at the heavy steel door of the basement. I knew it would not hold much longer. Not against the force that was coming. 10 minutes, my father said. His voice was a low, gritty vibration. Stay on the line. I am coming to collect my interest. The call did not end. He stayed there, a silent presence in my ear, a guardian in the dark. I lay there in the cellar, surrounded by old canvases and the smell of mildew, but I felt like I was sitting on a throne. The darkness was no longer my prison. It was my armor. The house above was quiet now. The music had stopped. Maybe they were starting to notice. Maybe the first phone call had come in. A bank manager explaining a frozen account. A lawyer explaining a sudden lawsuit. The first cracks in the Sterling empire were appearing. And I was the one who pulled the trigger. I closed my eyes. I could hear the distant sound of tires screeching on the asphalt outside. The hum of heavy engines. The fleet was arriving. The janitor was here to clean the house. Quincy thought he was rid of me. He thought I was a girl who drew clothes. He is about to find out that Avance never stays down. And when we rise, we bring the storm with us. The floor began to vibrate. A low, heavy hum. It was not the wind. It was not the rain. It was the sound of the world ending for the Sterling family. The door above groaned. The reckoning was here. The vibration started in my marrow before it reached my ears. 5 black SUVs. 1 broken leg. And a husband who was about to realize he was already a ghost. I lay in the shadows of the basement, my cheek pressed against the freezing concrete. The smell of damp earth and old oil paint was thick in my lungs. But beneath the rot, I could smell the coming storm. The ozone. The sharp, electric scent of power. It was the sound of tires first. A long, aggressive screech of heavy rubber against the wet Tribeca cobblestones. 1, 2, 5. The engines did not just hum. They roared. A deep, guttural vibration that shook the very foundations of the penthouse. I felt the floor beneath me tremble. It was a rhythmic, commanding pulse. The deacon's cavalry had arrived upstairs. The silence of the house was shattered. I heard the muffled sound of a heavy door being forced. Not the delicate click of a key, but the violent, unapologetic intrusion of men who do not ask for permission. I heard Quincy's voice. It was high, thin, stripped of the arrogance he had used to break my spirit hours before. He was shouting for his security. He was yelling for Malik. Malik was the man he trusted, the head of his security, the shadow that walked behind him. Quincy thought he paid for loyalty. He thought his money could buy a wall of iron. He was about to find out that some walls are built with a different kind of currency. The basement door above me groaned. The wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. The light from the hallway flooded into my tomb. It was a harsh, artificial yellow that burned my eyes. I didn't turn away. I wanted to see the end of my isolation. 2 men stepped into the cellar. They did not move like police. They moved like predators, silent, precise. Their suits were dark as the night. Their faces were masks of stone. I could smell the rain on their coats, the crisp, cold scent of the Manhattan winter. One of them knelt beside me. His hand was rough but gentle as he checked my pulse. He didn't say a word. He just nodded to his partner. They lifted me. The pain in my leg flared into a white-hot scream. But I bit my lip until I tasted blood. I would not give Quincy the satisfaction of hearing me cry. They carried me up the stairs. My broken leg trailed behind like a piece of dead weight. Every step was an agony. But the rage in my chest was a cold fire that kept me conscious. We entered the living room. The penthouse was unrecognizable. It was no longer the sanctuary I had designed. It was a stage for a reckoning. Quincy was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The rain was drumming against the glass behind him. A frantic, chaotic beat. He looked small. His designer suit seemed too big for his trembling frame. Siani was huddled on the sofa, wrapped in my silk robe. Her eyes were wide. The black pearls around her neck looked like a noose. She looked at the men carrying me as if they were demons. And in a way, they were. What is the meaning of this? Quincy shouted. His voice cracked. He looked at the guards. I am calling the police. Malik? Where is Malik? Malik stepped out from the shadows of the dining room. He was a mountain of a man. His presence was a cold weight that sucked the air out of the room. He walked toward Quincy. Quincy breathed a sigh of relief. He reached out to grab Malik's arm. Malik, get these animals out of my house. Take my wife back to the cellar. Now, Malik did not move. He did not look at Quincy. He did not draw a weapon. He stopped 3 feet away from my husband. The room went deathly quiet. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock, the heavy, wet breath of a man who realized he was standing on the edge of an abyss. Malik turned. He looked at me. His eyes were not the eyes of a guard. They were the eyes of a servant looking at his queen, and then Malik did it. He lowered his head. He bent his waist. He performed a deep, ancient, traditional bow. A bow of absolute submission. My deepest apologies for the delay, Ms. Vance. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a world ending. Quincy's hand stayed frozen in midair. He looked at Malik, then at me, then at the black SUVs circling the building below. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The man who knew his passwords, the man who knew his mistresses, the man who watched his back every single night for 3 years. was not his employee? Malik was a sleeper. A Vance agent planted in the Sterling house before the wedding even happened. Quincy had lost control of his house. He had lost control of his life. And he didn't even know when it happened. He looked at the men holding me. He looked at the janitor's daughter who was being treated like royalty. Who? Who are you? He whispered. His voice was a pathetic, broken thing. I looked at him. I could smell his fear. It was a sharp, sour scent that filled the room. I looked at Siani. Her hand was clutching the black pearls so hard her knuckles were white. They were starting to understand. The designer was just a mask. The wife was just a role. I was a Vance, and a Vance never bleeds alone. Malik stood up. He loomed over Quincy like a shadow over a grave. The accounts are being drained. The board members are receiving your embezzlement files as we speak. And the deacon is in the elevator. Quincy fell back onto the sofa I had chosen for us. In the room I had filled with my brilliance. He looked at the elevator doors. They slid open with a soft, expensive chime. A figure stepped out. A figure that made the very air in the penthouse turn to ice. My father was here. He was not wearing a janitor's uniform. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Quincy's entire company. He looked at the room. He looked at the broken leg. He looked at the man who thought he could break a Vance. My father did not speak to Quincy. He walked straight to me. He touched my cheek with a hand that had moved the secret levers of the world for 40 years. I am sorry I let you play at being normal for so long, Kamari. I looked at Quincy one last time. He was a ghost in his own living room. He was a ghost, and he was just waiting for the funeral to start. The night of the SUVs was not a rescue. It was a hostile takeover. Not just of a company, but of a soul. The trap was set. The bait was my own broken body. I was returning home, not to reclaim my bed, but to bury him in it. Revenge is a dish best served with a smile and a fake tear. I am back, not as a warrior, but as a broken bird. I sat in the back of the black Maybach. My father's men were ghosts in the front seat. The air was sterile, antiseptic. It smelled like the surgery wing at New. My right leg was a heavy, white cage of plaster. It was a physical reminder of the night Quincy snapped my life in half. I looked at the Tribeca Tower, our home. It looked like a tomb of glass and steel. I adjusted my silk scarf. I made sure my hands were trembling, just enough for him to see. The elevator climbed, smooth, silent, like a predator. My heart was a stone, but I made my breath shallow. I made my eyes wide and watery. I had to be the victim he expected. I had to be the weak girl he thought he could control. The doors slid open with a soft, expensive chime. The penthouse was filled with the scent of lilies. White lilies. The color of surrender. Or a funeral. Quincy was standing there. He was not the monster from the basement. He was wearing a soft, cashmere sweater. He had a look of deep, calculated remorse on his face. He held a bouquet in his hands. He looked like a man who had made a mistake, not a man who had committed a crime. I did not speak. I let Malik wheel me into the center of the room. The floor was polished. It reflected the gray Manhattan sky. I looked at the grand staircase. I felt a phantom pain in my marrow. I flinched. A small, sharp movement that I knew Quincy would catch. He stepped forward. His voice was a low, soothing hum. Kamari, you're home. He reached out a hand. I pulled back. I pressed myself into the leather of the wheelchair. I let a small, shaky breath escape my lips. I wanted the world to see my fear. I wanted the audience in the shadows to scream at me to run. I wanted them to hate him for every breath he took. Don't touch me, I whispered. My voice was thin, brittle, like dried leaves. Quincy stopped. He put the flowers on the marble table. He dropped to his knees in front of my chair. He looked up at me with eyes that were masters of the lie. I know, I went too far. The stress of the business. The fear of losing you. I lost my mind. Please, Kamari, give me a chance to make it right. I looked away. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. It was a masterpiece of performance. I was a Vance, and we are the best actors in the world when the stakes are blood. He moved closer. He took my cold hand in his. His skin felt like a snake. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wrap my fingers around his throat and squeeze until the light left his eyes. But I stayed still. I let him think he was winning. I let him think that the designer was back in her cage. I have nowhere else to go, I said. It was a lie. I had an empire behind me, but he needed to believe I was trapped. He needed to believe that I was a beggar at his table. Siani was not in the room, but I could smell her. Her perfume was a lingering, bitter note in the air. She was hiding in the guest suite, watching, waiting. I knew she was furious. I knew she wanted me gone. But Quincy had a new fear now. He had seen the black SUVs. He had seen Malik's bow. He knew my father was a shadow he could not outrun. He thought that by bringing me home, by forgiving my father's intrusion, he could neutralize the threat. He thought he could use me as a shield against the deacon. I looked around the living room. Everything was the same. The Italian furniture, the modern art, the heavy, silent atmosphere of wealth. But it was a crime scene. I could still hear the click of my stilettos from the night of the betrayal. I could still hear the crack of my bone. I looked at Quincy. He was stroking my hand now, his thumb moving in slow, hypnotic circles. I fired the staff who saw that night, he whispered. It's just us now. We can start over. I'll give you anything. Just tell your father to back off. Tell him we are okay. I lowered my head. I let my hair fall over my face to hide the cold, lethal glint in my eyes. He was so transparent. He was begging for his own life while pretending to care about mine. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a truce. I looked up. I let my lip tremble. I'll try, Quincy, but I'm scared. My leg, it hurts so much. He smiled then. It was a small, predatory curve of his lips. He thought he had me. He thought the pain had broken my spirit. I'll take care of you. I'll be your legs until you can walk again. He leaned in and kissed my forehead. I felt a wave of nausea. I felt the skin crawl where his lips touched me. I closed my eyes. In the darkness of my mind, I was auditing his doom. I was counting the seconds until the mercy trap snapped shut. Every kiss he gave me was a debt he would pay in interest. Every "I'm sorry" was a nail in his coffin. The audience would be screaming now. They would be calling me a fool. They would be typing in the comments, telling me to get out, telling me he is going to finish the job. Good. Let them scream. Let the engagement rise. The more they fear for me, the more they will celebrate when I finally pull the trigger. I am not a victim. I am a predator in a cast. I am the shadow in his bed, the ghost in his bank accounts. Quincy stood up. He looked proud. He looked like the man of the house again. He didn't realize that Malik was standing by the door. Not to protect him, but to watch him. He didn't realize that every word we spoke was being recorded, transmitted to a secure server in a bunker upstate. He didn't realize that the broken bird had already sharpened her beak. I'll have the cook prepare your favorite, he said. He walked toward the kitchen with a spring in his step. He thought he was a genius. He thought he had played the deacon's daughter. I sat in my wheelchair. The silence of the penthouse returned. It was a heavy hum of a lie. I looked at the floor. Single. Red petal had fallen from the lilies. It looked like a drop of blood on the white marble. I reached into the side pocket of my chair. I felt the cold, hard edge of the special phone Malik had given me. I didn't take it out. I just touched it. It was my connection to the real world. My connection to the fire. I looked at the grand staircase one last time. I am back in the house, Quincy, but I am not staying. I am just here to collect the keys to your kingdom. And when I leave, I am taking the walls with me. The micro cliffhanger was beginning to form in my mind. I needed one more piece of the puzzle. The password to his private ledger. The one he kept in the safe behind the portrait of his father. I looked at the portrait. The old man was staring back at me. Cold, arrogant, just like his son. I smiled. A real smile this time. Sharp, small, hidden. Tomorrow. The board meeting. Tomorrow. The first crack in his legacy. I let out a long, tired sigh. I called out to him in my broken voice. Quincy, could you bring me some water? I heard his footsteps returning, eager, confident. He was coming to serve his queen. He just didn't know it was his last meal. The dead do not stay buried. They wait. They breathe in the cracks of the walls. I thought I was here to steal a fortune. But tonight, I found a ghost. The Sterling mansion was silent. It was a heavy, suffocating kind of quiet. The kind of silence that only exists in a house built on top of a graveyard. Quincy was asleep. I had watched him drift off. His breath was shallow. He looked peaceful, like a man who had not broken his wife's spirit, like a man who was not a thief. I waited until the grandfather clock in the hall struck 2. The sound was a dull, ominous thud. I moved. I did not use my wheelchair. I crawled. My broken leg was a heavy, throbbing weight, but the adrenaline was a cold, sharp blade in my chest. I smelled the faint, bitter scent of the lilies in the foyer. They smelled like a funeral. I reached the study. The door groaned. A slow, tortured sound that felt like a scream in the midnight air. I did not turn on the lights. The silver moon was bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It cast long, jagged shadows across the oak shelves. I could smell the old leather, the dust of 1,000 legal lies, the expensive tobacco that Victor Sterling, my father-in-law, used to smoke. It was a masculine, aggressive scent. I made my way to the portrait. The Patriarch. Victor Sterling. He was looking down at me with cold, arrogant eyes. He looked like his son, a monster in a tailored suit. I reached behind the frame. My fingers were cold, clammy. I felt the keypad of the safe. Malik had given me the codes. I typed them in. The click of the mechanism was sharp. It was the sound of a secret finally being unmasked. I pulled the heavy steel door open. I expected ledgers. I expected wire transfers to Siani's offshore accounts. I found those. But there was something else. Small. Yellowed folder tucked in the very back. It was labeled Project 1998. My heart stopped. 1998 was the year my mother died. The year my world turned into a storm of shadow. I pulled it out. The paper felt brittle, like it would crumble into ash if I breathed too hard. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a photo. It was not a happy memory. It was a crime scene. A rainy street in Brooklyn. A silver car wrapped around a pole. I knew that car. It was my mother's. But there was a detail I had never seen in the official police reports. A second car. A black SUV with a Sterling Construction logo. It was barely visible in the corner of the frame. I felt a cold sweat break across my neck. My lungs felt like they were filled with ice. I flipped the page. I saw a handwritten note. It was Victor Sterling's handwriting. The same jagged, sharp script I had seen on 100 business contracts. It said, "The nuisance is handled. The deacon will take the fall." I couldn't breathe. My father, the man the world called a monster. The man I had spent 20 years running from because I thought his hands were stained with my mother's blood. He was innocent. I saw the receipts. Payments to a corrupt detective named O'Malley. Payments to a forensic specialist. A list of evidence to be planted in my father's garage. A bloody handkerchief. A silver lighter that belonged to my father. They didn't just kill her. They turned her husband into a murderer. They made me hate the only man who ever truly loved me. They let me grow up in a house of lies while my father built an empire. In the shadows to protect a daughter who despised him, the rage that hit me was not a fire. It was a blizzard. It was a lethal. Whites out of pure hatred. I looked at the portrait of Victor Sterling. He wasn't just a thief. He was a butcher. He had stolen my mother's life. Then he had stolen my father's reputation. And then he had let his son marry me to keep the Vance legacy close, to keep the deacon from looking too deep into the past. I was not a wife. I was a hostage. A long-term investment in a cover-up. My hands were shaking so hard the papers rattled. I could hear the rain starting to drum against the glass outside. A frantic, chaotic beat. It sounded like the night she died. I looked at a smaller envelope inside the folder. It contained a single pearl. A black pearl. It was identical to the one Siani was wearing. The ones that belonged to my mother. Victor hadn't just taken her life. He had kept a trophy. He had given my mother's legacy to his son's mistress. I felt a physical pain in my chest. A tight, burning sensation. I gripped the pearl so hard it bit into my palm. Everything was different now. The revenge was no longer about a broken leg. It was no longer about the $2 million Quincy stole. This was about blood. This was about the 20 years of silence. This was about clearing the name of the man who stayed in the shadows to keep me safe. Even when I called him a killer, the atmosphere in the study changed. The shadows felt thicker, more aggressive. I realized I wasn't just a designer anymore. I was an executioner. I took my phone and photographed every page, every receipt, every note. My father needed to see this. The deacon needed to know that the war he had been fighting was built on a foundation of sterling lies. I felt a surge of cold, calculated purpose. I would not just liquidate their bank accounts. I would erase their history. I would make sure the world knew that the Sterlings were not royalty. They were carrion. I looked at the grand staircase outside the study door. I could hear a floorboard creak. It was not the wind. It was a heavy, deliberate step. Someone was awake. Someone was moving through the dark. I didn't panic. I didn't hide the folder. I sat there in the silver moonlight, my broken legs stretched out, the evidence of 20 years of murder in my lap. I was the shadow now. I was the ghost of the woman they killed, and I was done acting scared. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I could smell the faint, sharp scent of Quincy's expensive cologne. He was standing there, in the dark, watching the door. I looked at the black pearl in my hand. It was cold. Final, I was a Vance, and a Vance never bleeds alone. But tonight, I realized something else. We also never forget, and we never, ever forgive. I looked toward the door. I let a small, lethal smile touch my lips. "Come in." "Quincy," I whispered into the dark. "I have something you need to see." The air in the grand ballroom was thick. It smelled of gardenias and expensive gin. Thousands of eyes were fixed on the stage. I stood in the back. My dark silk dress felt like cold armor. Tonight, Quincy Sterling was not receiving an award. He was walking into a trap. I could hear the rhythmic clink of crystal glasses. 1,000 voices humming like a hive of bees. The lights were low, golden. They cast long, greedy shadows across the floor. I felt the cold weight of the red diamond on my neck. It felt like my mother's hand, steady, quiet, lethal. Quincy was at the podium. He adjusted his tie. He looked like the king of Manhattan. He was smiling, a wide, arrogant smile that did not know the floor was about to vanish. He started to speak about legacy. He spoke about honor. He spoke about his commitment to this city. I looked at Siani in the front row. She was wearing a white dress, looking like an angel of lies. She was clapping. Her eyes were fixed on the man she had helped steal my life. They thought the mercy trap was real. They thought I was still the broken bird in the wheelchair. But the designer was dead. The Vance was alive. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could see the breath of the socialites in the air. Then the screen behind him flickered. The golden tribute video vanished. A harsh blue light filled the room. The hum of the crowd died in an instant. It was replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush the bones. Quincy stopped mid-sentence. He turned his head slowly. His eyes widened. It was not a picture of his face. It was a scan of a document. Project 1998. The signatures were clear. Victor Sterling. Claude Fairchild. The blood contracts were dancing on the walls. A masterpiece of evidence. The crowd leaned in. I could hear the rustle of silk as hundreds of people moved at once. The screen began to scroll. It showed the receipts of the police payouts. $50,000 for a silent detective. It showed the photos of the car accident. The real ones. Not the ones they used to frame my father. I could see my mother's silver car. I could see the sterling logo on the black SUV that pushed her off the road. Then it showed the recent bank transfers. The $5 million stolen from Lathan Designs. The transfers to Siani Fairchild's offshore accounts. The secrets of 40 years were being broadcast in high definition. The speakers did not play music. They erupted with a voice, deep, ominous. It was the voice of God. It was my father. The deacon. The Sterling family is a lie. The words echoed off the marble walls. They were not a whisper. They were a judgment. Built on the blood of a woman they murdered. Built on the theft of a daughter they tried to break. The crowd gasped. It was a collective, sharp intake of breath. Quincy backed away from the podium. His face turned gray. The king was losing his crown in front of the world. He looked like a cornered rat under a spotlight. I could feel the heat of the stage lights from where I stood. I could smell the ozone from the massive projectors. My palms were steady. I watched Siani try to stand, but her legs failed her. She fell back onto the velvet seat. She looked at the screen and saw her own name. Next to the word accomplice. The man of the year was now the monster of the century. I began to walk toward the stage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The click of my heels was the only sound in the room. It was a rhythmic, lethal beat. 1, 2, 1, 2. I didn't need a wheelchair. I didn't need a cane. I walked with the fire of 20 years of silence. Every step was a reclamation of my soul. I looked at Quincy. He was shaking. He looked at me as if I were a ghost. The investment failed, Quincy, I said. My voice was amplified by the microphones. It filled every corner of the ballroom. And now, the deacon is here to collect. I reached the stage and looked at the sea of socialites. The mayors. The moguls. Their faces were masks of horror. I looked at the heavy red velvet curtains behind the podium. I could hear the sound of heavy boots. The police. Or my father's men. The ballroom doors were locked. The night of the SUVs was over. The night of the reckoning had begun. Quincy reached out to me. His hands were damp with sweat. I didn't take them. I adjusted his tie one last time. The silk felt like a noose. I leaned in close so only he could hear my real voice. Smile, Quincy. The cameras are still rolling. And the world loves a tragedy. I stepped back and let the blue light of the blood contracts wash over us both. The final screen appeared. A photo of my mother, smiling, beautiful. Free. The ballroom was no longer a party. It was a courtroom, and the verdict was death for the Sterling name. The sound of a billion-dollar empire dying is not a bang. It is a quiet, persistent, digital ping. Quincy Sterling stood in the center of the wreckage. His face was the color of curdled milk. The golden lights of the ballroom now felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. I stood 5 feet away. The red diamond on my neck felt like a cold eye, watching. Judging the air in the room was stagnant. It felt like the oxygen was being sucked out by a massive, invisible vacuum. I could smell the sharp, sour scent of Quincy's sweat. It was the smell of a predator who had finally realized he was the prey. Quincy lunged for the bar. He did not move with his usual grace. He stumbled. His hands were shaking so hard his cufflinks rattled against his wrists. He needed a drink. He needed to feel the burn of expensive whiskey to numb the cold realization crawling up his spine. He grabbed a bottle and tossed his black card onto the marble counter. A piece of black titanium. It was supposed to be a key to any door in the world. A symbol of infinite power. The bartender, a man who had bowed to Quincy for 5 years, slid the card into the machine. The silence in that moment was absolute. We all heard the beep. It was a sharp, piercing sound. The screen flashed red, declined. Quincy stared at the machine. He tried again. His breathing was ragged, a wet, desperate sound. "Try a different terminal," he hissed. The bartender looked at him, not with respect, but with a cold, professional pity. "It is not the terminal. Mr. Sterling, the account has been purged." Quincy's hand stayed frozen on the counter. He looked at the card. It was just a piece of metal now. A heavy, useless scrap. The financial execution had begun. His credit was a corpse. Then his phone began to vibrate in his pocket. A frantic, buzzing insect. He pulled it out. The light from the screen reflected in his wide, terror-stricken eyes. It was a notification from the board of directors. An emergency email sent to every shareholder, every employee, every news outlet. The words were bold, black, final. Removal of CEO Quincy Sterling, effective immediately. The reason was listed in cold. Legal terms: embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. He was no longer the king of Tribeca. He was no longer the head of the company I had built with my own blood. He was a trespasser in his own gala. He looked at Siani. She was in the front row. Her face was a mask of pure horror. She was staring at her own phone. Her fingers were flying across the screen. I knew what she was looking for. The $5 million. The offshore accounts in the Bahamas. The retirement fund they had built from my stolen designs. I watched the moment she found the truth. Her jaw dropped. Her eyes filled with tears. Not of sadness, but of the realization that she was broke. Every cent they had stolen had been clawed back by a power they did not understand. I leaned against the podium. I looked at Quincy. He was a ghost in an expensive suit. The investment didn't just fail, Quincy. It was liquidated. He looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot. "How? Who did this?" He looked around the room, searching for an enemy he could see. He did not have to look far. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. The sound was like a thunderclap. Every head turned. Every voice died. A man stepped out from the shadows of the foyer. He was not wearing the gray overalls of the penthouse janitor. He was not carrying a mop or a bucket. He was wearing a navy blue suit, tailored by the finest hands in London. He carried a cane with a silver wolf's head. He did not walk like a servant. He walked like a god. Behind him, 6 men in charcoal suits followed. The executives of the global bank, the men who decided which nations flourished and which nations starved, my father. Elias Vance thought the crowd parted like the Red Sea. The moguls and the mayors bowed their heads, not in fear of a syndicate boss, but in reverence to the chairman of the global bank, the man who held the debt of half the city in his hands. Quincy's jaw dropped. The glass of water he was holding shattered on the floor. The sound of breaking crystal was the final note of his symphony. He looked at the man who used to empty his trash. He looked at the man he had called a nobody. My father stopped 3 feet away from Quincy. He did not look angry. He looked bored. He adjusted his silk cuffs. The red diamond on my neck matched the one on his ring. "I told you, Quincy. You should have checked the plumbing before you tried to flood the house." He turned to the bank executives. "The Sterling assets are to be folded into the Vance Trust by morning. I want his name erased from every building in this zip code." Quincy fell to his knees. The marble was cold, unforgiving. He looked at the man he thought was a janitor. He realized that the nobody didn't just work in the building. He owned the bank that held the mortgage on the building. The janitor was the chairman, and I the designer he had broken. Was his only heir, but as the lights in the ballroom began to flicker, I saw something that made the hair on my neck stand up. A shadow moved behind the red velvet curtains. It was not one of my father's men. It was a shadow with a familiar, lethal silhouette. Someone else was in the ballroom. Someone who had been waiting for the Sterlings to fall, just so they could finish the job. The wind on the 68th floor does not whisper. It screams. It is the rhythmic, violent sound of a city bowing to its new master. Quincy Sterling is silent now. He is no longer the king of the gala. He is just a number in a cold, concrete box. He sits in a cell that smells of industrial bleach and old. Bitter regrets. The silk suits are gone. The Italian marble is a memory now. He only has the sound of a dripping faucet and the weight of a life sentence for the blood on his father's hands. He thought he could break my leg. He didn't realize he was just building my throne. I can feel the vibration of the city beneath my feet. It is a low, constant hum of millions of lives. None of them know my name, but they all feel my influence. I am standing on the edge of the roof. The air is sharp. It tastes of ozone and the coming snow. I look down at the lights of Tribeca. They look like a sea of diamonds. Diamonds that I now own. I adjusted the red diamond on my neck. It felt heavy. It felt like a physical connection to the mother I lost. The woman who was murdered so the Sterlings could play at being royalty. The fire of vengeance has been extinguished. But in its place, a cold, hard power has formed. Siani Fairchild is a ghost. A social pariah walking the streets of a city that has already forgotten her name. I saw a photo of her yesterday. She was standing in line at a bus stop. Her designer dress was stained. Her eyes were hollow. The black pearls were gone. Sold to pay a lawyer who could not save her from the truth. Every door in Manhattan is locked to her. Every gala. Every club. Every friend. She is learning that when you steal from a Vance, you don't just lose your money. You lose your existence. She thought she was the light. She didn't realize that light is nothing without a shadow to hold it. I am no longer the designer. I am no longer the girl who draws clothes in the dark. I am the czar, the architect of a new empire. The Sterling building has been purged. The names on the board have been replaced. The documents I found in the safe are now in the hands of the federal authorities. Victor Sterling's legacy is a pile of ash, and I am the one holding the match. My father, the deacon, sits in his office 3 floors below. He is no longer the janitor. He is the silent partner of the world. He looks at me with a pride that is terrifying, because he knows I am more lethal than he ever was. I looked at my right leg. The brace is gone. The bone has healed. But the way I walk has changed. I move with a deliberate, heavy purpose. I move like a woman who knows the exact cost of every soul in this room. I can smell the expensive silk of my coat. I can feel the cold metal of the railing. The silence up here is absolute. It is the silence of the victor. I thought I wanted peace. I thought I wanted a normal life. But the Vance blood is too thick for normal. It craves the iron. It craves the control. I looked at the silver moon. It was a pale, cold disk in the black sky. I remembered the night in the basement, the smell of the oil paint, the sound of the dripping pipe. I realized then that the basement wasn't my prison. It was my cocoon. I had to be broken so I could be remade. I had to lose everything so I could find the strength to take it all. Quincy thought he was the one in control. He thought he was the one holding the keys. He was just a pawn in a game that was over before he even made his first move. The penthouse is mine now, but I don't sleep there. I sleep in a room that smells like cedar and old paper. A room where the shadows are my only company. I am building a library, a place for the children of the city, a place named after my mother. It is the only thing I have done that isn't built on blood. It is the only part of the designer that survived the war. I want the world to remember her name, not as a victim, but as the spark that destroyed the Sterlings. I felt a movement behind me, a soft, subtle shift in the air. I did not turn around. I knew the scent. It was a mixture of rain and expensive tobacco. My father was standing there. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. We were 2 predators looking out over our territory. The Sterling family was a memory. The Fairchilds were a footnote. The new reign had begun, and the city would never be the same. But as the wind picked up, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I remembered the shadow from the ballroom, the silhouette behind the velvet curtains. I realized that the war might be over, but the debt is never fully paid. I reached into my pocket and felt the small, hard object I had found in my mother's diary. A key. A key that didn't fit any lock in the Sterling house. I looked at the city one last time. The lights were flickering. A storm was coming. I turned to my father. I saw the look in his eyes. A look of warning. A look of fear. He pointed to the elevator. The doors were opening, but no one stepped out. Only a single white lily lay on the floor. It was fresh. It was beautiful. And it was exactly like the ones I had placed on my mother's grave that morning. The elevator began to descend. The chime echoed in the empty air. I felt my chest tighten. I realized that the Sterlings were just the beginning. The real monster wasn't in a cell. The real monster was the one who gave the Sterlings the blood contracts in the first place. I looked at the white lily. I realized that the Matriarch's will had one more page. A page I hadn't read yet. A page that was written in a handwriting I didn't recognize.